Did you get a recording message there, everybody? Oh, yeah, we have. Yeah. Okay, good stuff. Well, welcome. Let's do the formal introduction, just as Ollie just said. This is the Experts at Work session, how to create a wellbeing culture that sets you apart, and the session's for members of all three of our networks. We are recording, as I say, just to let you know. And big welcome to Brian Waters and Ollie Henry of WorkLifeWell, who work with businesses to look after their employees, reduce stress and sick days, and attract talent. And it's WorkLifeWell, that's all one word, which I think is great because it sounds like you're in a hurry to improve well-being. WorkLifeWell. And Brian and Ollie are going to be looking at some of the big current issues in terms of well-being, bring them to life with some case studies and asking you, our members, about some of your experiences as well in this particular area. So it's going to be pretty interactive, and thanks guys for doing this. No breakout rooms for this one. We're going to send everyone the slides and the recording afterwards, and there's a half finish at 2 o'clock. Send us questions and chat throughout. Sorry, questions and suggestions via the chat throughout, I beg your pardon. And should we all go on mute for now, Brian and Ollie? Is that best for you?
Yeah, I mean, if there's no background noise, no worries, but if there is, maybe that's best.
Yeah, gotcha. Okay, doke. So probably best mute for now, as I say. And over to you both. Thank you ever so much for running the show.
Yeah, thank you so much. I was about to say, Brian, would you like to share your screen? But you're one step ahead. Hi, everybody. Really big welcome. Thanks again to everybody here and to you, Richard, for having us. I'm Ollie, one of the co-founders of WorkLifeWell. I'll do a little bit more of a formal introduction very soon. We've been really excited about today, and we recognise that in 45, 60 minutes, there's a lot to pack into. So in terms of a tiny bit of Teams housekeeping to leverage off what Richard said, if you've got any questions at any stage, if Brian or I are blabbing on about something, don't feel like you need to wait till the end. Unmute, interrupt us, use the chat facility as much as you can, and we can try and apply lots of the context of what we're talking about to you and your organisation specifically. So if we move on a slide, this is what today's all about. Making sure that you have the tools to create and nurture a healthy, happy workplace culture moving into 2023. So not just what a good wellness strategy looks like, but how do we create one? How do we implement one? And then most importantly, how do we actually get our colleagues engaged? And then later on, we can kind of talk about some case studies and what we've done at WorkLifeWell that can really take your health and wellbeing strategy to the next level. So a bit more of a formal introduction and a bit more of my background, moving on a slide. I'm Ollie, I'm a health and wellbeing specialist. So I've been in the industry for over a decade now, started out as a performance coach, co-founder of of WorkLifeWell, keynote speaker on all things well-being, from mental health, emotional intelligence, communication through to exercise, nutrition, and so on. Recently appointed the global head of well-being at EasyJet, which is a really interesting role because I've spent so long consulting and giving organizations advice on how to implement strategies, to now be living it and seeing it from the inside and using that knowledge to then help service clients as well. This is Brian. Brian, you can give everybody a wave.
Hey, hi, I'm Brian. I'm one of the directors at WorkLifeWell. I've held exec and non-exec positions for global businesses, and I specialise in employee wellbeing. So delighted to meet you. By the way, because I'm showing my presentation, I can't really see any of you, so please do interrupt and make it known. And Ollie, keep on telling me to move on to the next slide because I can't see anything.
Yes, we'll do. Well, you can do that now. That would be great. If everybody wants to open up the chat facility and just start answering that question in the chat facility so we can keep referencing back to some of these points. So what your biggest employee wellbeing challenges at the moment? And obviously the end of 2022 highlighted across the network, really across the board, increasing levels of workload and stress. But when you couple that with, Brian, you're now sharing your screen of attendees as opposed to the deck.
No problem. I was just seeing if I could see the chat at the same time. Clearly I can't. I'll let you monitor that, Ollie.
But when we combine those kind of internal challenges of increasing workloads and stress with the global landscape, right? The cost of living crisis, government instability, post-pandemic, it becomes a really tricky environment to navigate, and making sure that we're listening to our people and implementing the right strategies that not only drive engagement but actually help the root cause is a very challenging thing. So it'd be really interesting to see what your specific challenges are. But I'm going to pass over to Brian to talk a little bit through some of our clients and some of their top concerns for 2023. and then we can kind of make a start on some of the strategy piece.
So we're delighted to have supported some pretty well-known businesses to help them to take their employee well-being onto the next level and develop a well-being strategy that works. We continually poll them really on their biggest challenges and compile a top 10 of those challenges. I'm not going to go through all today because I think we'd be here for a while. And we're going to compare and contrast these with those that you put in the chat. I'm just going to pull into kind of three of these in particular. Of course, mental health support and resilience is the ever-present, always ongoing support that we are continually helping colleagues to manage, supporting them as employers and looking to always evolve the support and advice there. I think two in particular of note is what we saw across our clients tail end of last year. And of course, it's all to do with the planning for 2023 is increased workloads. We're hearing more and more reports, and I'm sure you have done in the media, of burnout becoming a very real and present danger as workloads increase. And of course, the dynamics of greater collaboration across teams was made even more challenging in a hybrid working environment. But equally, that creates lots of opportunities for new people to come into the workforce. They can also have many positives as well, and widening the pool of talent. So I think what we're going to do at this point is we want to kind of find out more about the chat. Ollie, I don't know if you see the chat and if people have entered their challenges.
It's amazing really to see that the synergy and similarities between what everybody's saying, from mental health related absences, and whether that's because we're empowering our teams to be more open about it, or because of the global landscape there are more mental health difficulties post-pandemic, all the way through. I mean, I would say 80% of people here have used the word stress, burnout, cost of living crisis. And if you think of it as a bucket, right, and it's filling up with all of the stressors, not yet stress, and that's an important distinction, the things that have the ability to cause stress. Now, workload, mental health may have always been relatively high, right, filling up the bucket. But when you start adding in the cost of living crisis, government instability, post-pandemic, then it can make everything else within that feel far heavier and far more significant. Some of it is perceived and some of it is real life. And when that bin or that bucket starts to overflow, which is what we're experiencing, that's where that word burnout starts to come in. And that's essentially what this slide is. Why are we doing this in the first place? If we move on to the next slide, this is a really great way of visualizing the importance and power of why you're here today, right? Why employee well-being is so crucial. Now, I'm sure everybody recognizes this cycle in themselves or their colleagues, and post-pandemic, you could argue that this has been accelerated tenfold. If you look at that circle, top right, stressor, things that have the ability to cause us stress, and we add in all of the global kind of health. Now, it's not always in this order, right? But it can often start with poor sleep, leading to less exercise. So we go in search of, sugary fast foods to spike our insulin and energy levels. Our posture starts to deteriorate. Maybe we get more pain. Now you times that by 24 hours, it's not a problem. A week, not so bad. But when we start getting into the weeks, months, years, that's when burnout becomes a real challenge and a real issue. So we're not necessarily looking to tackle the stresses, we're looking to tackle the stressors and the ability to cope with those stressors. And it's important to signal that now, because we never really want to lose sight of the intention and purpose of health and well-being. It's not a return on investment exercise. Those are the benefits, don't get me wrong. It's a long-term value of investment. How can we maximize the chance of keeping our employees healthy and well, and putting them at the forefront of our policies, our procedures, and our practices? Okay. So how are we doing as a team, as a group today? I think Brian's going to go through a couple of resources that help you better identify where you are on your journey, which is often a point that's missed in the creation of a good strategy.
Thanks, Ollie. So we're going to look at a couple of tools really, and how we can identify where we're at in the process of continually improving. So one of which is a well-being wheel or histogram. Well-being can be divided into these 7 areas. Some people divide it into 5 different areas or 3 different areas, but of course, and you've already highlighted the increasing impact of financial security, the cost of living crisis, and some of the chat comments that you shared. So this is all about how balanced is your well-being. This is a histogram we can send around actually afterwards, as this is something that would be helpful. And we just want you to consider really in all these different areas how evolved and where are your biggest gaps between where you are now and where you'd like to be. Typically in your own time, you could print this off, you could share it with colleagues. It's a very quick, ready reckoner to help to understand really what that gap in perceptions is with regards to the employee well-being that you provide to colleagues.
And just to build on that just a tiny bit as well, what it helps to do is it gives you that benchmark sometimes, right? You get that score out of 70. It's very difficult sometimes to know what a well-being baseline looks like, but it will also help you better identify your weakest link. It's really easy to sometimes just jump into, let's do something around mental health, or let's do something around men's mental health, or the menopause, or the globally recognized days. But when you can better understand the area that is genuinely causing the most amount of challenges to your organization, the weakest link, if you like, it's easier to then put together the strategy.
Great. So I think what we're going to ask you to do now very quickly is in the chat facility, if you could please pick one of these 7 that represents the area you would like in 2023 to focus on most. Of course, all of the areas, I'm sure there's always the ability to improve everything that we do, but if you could just pick one, I think that'd be really helpful, and we'll just see if there are any commonalities. Ollie, can I ask you to monitor the chat? Because I can't see it.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a good point, Richard. We're going to come on to the role modeling of leaders a little bit later. So essentially, you're looking at that. If 10 were the best it could possibly be in your business, and 1 were to be, it's not great at all, which is the one that would score lowest? So technically, the one that needs the most amount of work. So we're getting a lot of workplace strategy, workplace wellness strategy, 1 leadership. 99% of people are saying strategy.
Right. That's really, really clear. What I think we'll do today is we'll really hone in on that point in particular. Next is, where are you at your well-being journey? So then none of these, of course, if you're anywhere on this journey and you're here today, it's because obviously you appreciate its importance and you're working towards improving. So it doesn't really matter where you are, in the sense that you're working towards hopefully evolving what you're doing to be able to fully support colleagues and employees and others. So are you, number 1, thinking about it, 2, reacting to needs as and when they spring up, like little wellness fires? Have you got some proactive activity? That might be gym memberships, it might be the odd workshop, or is it actually ongoing and really very much a program of work that is there to support your colleagues? To what extent are you highly evolved? Are you using data to really personalize that approach to employee well-being, so you can be very clear on who needs what and how you go about providing? So again, fingers on buzzers, or in this case, the chat facility, please. Please could you add a number between 1 and 5?
You got to think of it, right? It's like putting in a destination on a sat nav without putting in where you're starting from. So sometimes it's a really nice thing to do, to think, right, where are we actually right now, and where would we like to get to? We've had a lot of 3s, Brian, a couple of 4s, but majority 3s.
That's good.
So
that's really encouraging. I think that just gives us a little bit of a snapshot of where the community is right now. Ollie, let's move on.
Yeah, and I think that thinking about that, and number 3 being some proactive, you probably still have the reactive, and it's very important to do so. But there's a real reason why, when we try to move from a 3 to a 4 and a 5, why very few wellbeing initiatives truly succeed in shifting culture. And the 3 reasons tend to be when the discovery. So the discovery phase of your strategy, it's not necessarily targeted enough. So you're not getting the right level of insight to be able to make informed decisions and put the right KPIs in place. The second is when we start thinking about the design of that strategy, it might only be reliant on 1 or 2 people within HR in a huge organization who understandably aren't necessarily health and well-being specialists. They're specialists in HR and people, but well-being can sometimes be a beast in its own. And when it's reliant on a few people, it's a very difficult thing to overcome. And then that third one is the actual implementation of that strategy. When it's a bit stab in the dark, bit part, and not necessarily persistent and consistent and targeted, it can often fall into feeling a little bit extracurricular to the organization. So if we can manage those 3 things and get them in the right order with the right level of detail, then we're on track to implementing a wellbeing initiative that truly succeeds. So what are we and others doing to tackle these challenges? So on the next slide, here's what a few people have been up to, and I'm only going to reference them top line because we're going to go a little bit more in detail, especially on Gerald Edelman, who's an accountancy firm, a really progressive accountancy firm, a little bit later. But they were very aware that they didn't necessarily have a culture of open, honest communications around the levels of conversation around mental health and emotional intelligence that they needed to. So they went on this huge journey culminating in a panel event where they had all of the senior partners sat around a table in front of the whole organization, only talking about mental health. Now they've been on a 2-year journey with us, so it was easy to implement that type of activity. But if we move that onto my work at EasyJet and heading up the health and wellbeing strategy, historically, that strategy might be led by the calendar. Like I said at the start, it's Men's Mental Health Day. Let's talk about men's mental health. Now that's not wrong. It shows that a culture of care, but it's not necessarily going to shift behavior and tackle the root cause of the problem. So when I came into the organization about 5 months ago, we said, right, let's stop. Let's wipe the slate clean. And let's start by just taking a step back and better analyzing and understanding our benchmarks. So we're putting together this huge discovery piece on better identifying the difference between a well-being want and a well-being need, which Brian's going to talk through very, very shortly. And then if we look at CDS Global, who are in the publishing space, they knew that they needed to start with their middle managers and their senior stakeholders in the business before they even started talking about health and well-being. So they've put a huge program together, and the sole focus of that program is how can we upskill the relevant people in the business so that they can handle sensitive conversations with care before we start thinking about our wider health and wellbeing strategy. So 3 slightly different approaches, but all as valuable and as valid as the other. But what we're going to do for the rest of this workshop, if you like, is go through that discover, design and deliver in a little bit more detail, giving you some top tips so that no matter where you are on your journey and whether you have some similarities with any of these 3 businesses on the screen, you're going to be able to take something from one of those parts and implement it, hopefully, within your businesses as well. So Brian, if you want to move on.
Yeah, I think before we move on, I'm very conscious this is intended to be a conversation and sharing of knowledge, and the last thing we want is death by PowerPoint. So actually, if there are 1 or 2 examples from around our virtual table of things that you've been up to that you feel would be beneficial to share at this stage, feel free to unmute and share a couple of things you've been doing, because it will just inspire others. What we hear time and time again from the feedback that we get on these sessions is as valuable as some of hopefully our frameworks may be, actually lots of the value is that peer-to-peer knowledge sharing. What are others doing? Could we try that? Has that worked? Has that not worked? So Ollie, has anybody unmuted or raised their hands and is willing to share some of the things they've been up to?
I can't see that on my screen. Joss has said something really interesting. Joss, do you mind unmute? Or actually, sorry, Langley or Kay, you have put your hand up. Go for it.
Yeah, it was just in response to the cost of living crisis and also the sort of financial well-being. So we ran a well-being week in October, but we talked about it being health and wealth, and we featured were designed to be online. So for our hybrid workers working at home, they could join exclusively virtual workshops. And then we had a one-day event, which was very much sort of drop in and visit different stalls, if you like, in one of our facilities in the office. So there was something for the people in the office and something for people remotely. But we invited HSBC to come in and talk about how you can do practical things to help improve your sort of financial health. And they offered some free follow-up activity for colleagues to pick up independently if that was of interest to them. And that also, through the chat facility, encouraged colleagues to share money saving tips with one another, some of that being our existing benefits that provide retail savings, for example, but also some of the people had got hints and tips. And so the virtual setting meant lots of good things got shared in the chat. So we actually found that online attendance was far better than the in-person attendance in the office drop-in. We had a good response to the virtual workshops and quite a poor response to the in-office drop-in sessions. But the topic range was inclusive of that financial health, with also some pension workshops run as well, focused at the different age ranges. So those just starting out in their careers, and then those in retirement and the guys in the middle. So we ran very structured sessions for that as well, which again was about giving people sort of better education and understanding to help them make more informed decisions.
Great. That's really, it shows the level of detail that goes into planning something around one central theme. But it's something that I want to pick up on what you said, which I find really interesting. People did attend in person, right? But it was just less so than those online.
Yeah.
But one thing to note was if you didn't allow people to attend in person, the people that attended in person may not have attended online. So the thing that I took from that is having a blended offering. If you're working in a community or in an organization where you work across different geographies, some who prefer to be in the office, some who are online, some who are out in the field, and EasyJet, for example, some who are in the sky, you've got to make sure that no matter what the theme is and no matter what the topic of conversation is, you've got to put yourself in your colleagues' shoes, right? And think, how will they best engage with this content? And it sounds like you did that to the nth degree, which is great. So thank you for sharing that. Any other thoughts? Any other things that really have worked recently or not worked, and why you think they haven't worked? Joss, I can see you've put something in the chat about 2 strategies and programs at different organizations that were really good, but getting the consistent behaviors aligned with senior role modeling is a challenge. Do you want to expand on that?
I've kind of got to now, you've asked me, haven't I? Yeah, so it's more an observation than anything. So this is Yorkshire Building Society now in Mitchell, and I would say both organisations had genuinely good wellbeing strategies, fairly focused, seen as very central to kind of the people activity that was going on in the organisations at the time. But I think part of the challenge that we had, certainly now in Mitchell as well, you hear a lot of people saying, but I don't have the time to go to these events. I don't have the time to really, and so that's why I've used the word consistently, because I think there was a definite element of, look, we want these things. We value the fact the organisation is investing, because the organisation did invest a huge amount of money, time, and senior people's time as well. But colleagues struggled with consistently engaging themselves in it. And I love what you said about Gerald Edelman, because there's similar environments there in Mitchell, and we've got partners and it's fee earning, and time is very much money. And I think there was a lot of senior leaders bought into it, but not necessarily really understanding the role they had to play in truly role modeling it and making it okay to take the time out to engage in those things, because when time is money, it makes it just a little bit trickier, I think.
Amazing. So I'm hearing 2 things there, 2 really important things. The first is that the environment will always outweigh good intention. So senior leaders in the business can have the best intent in the world and put a fair amount of resource behind it. But if the environment still dictates a culture of working late, working through, poor communication, doesn't matter how much intent and goodwill, the environment will always win. So you've first got to tackle the actual root cause of the problem, right? And the second one is sometimes there's a need to tell a better story and narrative to your senior leaders, create a slightly stronger business case before you get the buy-in of here's what our people are telling us, here's the impact that it's having on the business, and sometimes the bottom line, and this is why your involvement is so important. And when you combine those two things, that's genuinely where the magic starts to happen from a health and wellbeing perspective. But thank you, that was really, really good insight. Brian, should we move on to kind of our framework and how the Discover Design?
Well, I just want to pick up, the key thing in the chat earlier was all about strategy. So we're going to do a deep dive on strategy and how we go about it and the framework that we use to apply. So the framework we use is based on the 3 Ds. With an M for measure as well. So we're going to build upon each of these areas and hopefully just give a few tips for how we go about it. There might be a few lessons learned, and equally at the end we'll open it up to questions and you can share how you go about it as well. So those 3 Ds really are the backbone or the spine of our framework. Initially, it's all about discovery. How do we look to understand people's needs and wants? Because when we can pinpoint what people need, then we can build a program off the back of it and make sure it addresses those needs and also doesn't waste absolutely valuable, scarce resources and essentially budgets. Then we move on to then taking that insight to design the program, and then not just design the program, designing the engagement. We're going to cover these 2 areas: delivery and the execution. And like with anything, our plan is only its execution and its implementation. And finally, we measure so that we go back, refine the goals, and refine our program accordingly. So we're going to take a deeper dive now on the first D, being discovery. Okay. My computer has decided to have the little blue wheel of, okay, that's good. Hopefully we are now, it has caught up with ourselves. Okay, so here is Mark, Katie and Rena. And really at this stage, ultimately, it's just about people and it's about understanding their needs. Everyone's idea of well-being, everyone's challenges, stresses and stressors are slightly different. So we're only as good as our colleagues and how well we know them. So it's really about practical things that we can do to understand their specific needs, to pinpoint what might help them develop there. So that's relatively easy for 3 people, but in many of our businesses around the table, we might be dealing with hundreds, perhaps we're dealing with thousands, and that's when it starts to get really tricky. All that data, how do we make sense of all that data, all those different individual needs and wants? Well, one of the ways we do that is we might undertake both quantitative, so typically surveys, but also qualitative one-to-ones, focus groups, etc., to really understand what the challenges are that colleagues are experiencing. And over the last few years, there's been no end of challenges, no end of stresses on top of just getting the job done. And so we create surveys and we create a lot of data, but we have to make sense of this data. So how do we do that? Well, one way we do that is we go back to our model for well-being. We can break down the challenges in these 3 different ways. Of course, as you know from the histogram we presented earlier, you could use all 7 if we wanted. But what we're seeking to do here is to understand and make sense, to cluster those needs so that we can start to build a picture of those challenges. Now, emotional, typically, this really kind of is anything that affects one's emotion and their kind of mental health. So it could well be, as we saw throughout the pandemic, the impact of kind of social distancing or traveling and the impact that has on one's emotions. So that's an example maybe where the physical starts to touch into the emotional. And people were working from home a lot longer, as we all are, now more so than ever, sometimes hunched over sofas or over kitchen tables, and we were seeing a greater number of bad backs. That being an example of physical, and then equally chemical. I don't know about you, but when I'm working from home, my ability to choose healthy eating snacks over less healthy seems to be dramatically reduced, and that might be an example of chemical. So we're starting really to cluster our community's different needs, and we're starting to group them so we can make sense and consider what we might want to do in the design stage to address those challenges.
So, and I think that there's one build on that. That model of stress is when you're truly able to identify the cause, right, or the impact, you're then better able to help with the solution. And often, and I'm going to show in a second, businesses jump into solution mode, jump into the doing. Let's put some weekly yoga classes before we know if back pain, postural pain, or disconnecting and unwinding is even a challenge. So the first question we have, I say the first question, one of the questions we have, just with a very simple yes or no, you know, a binary type of question. A well-being want and a well-being need. Brian's well-being want might be to have more free fruit and veg in the office, but his need might be to have better lines of communication and emotional intelligence amongst middle managers, or more understanding and appreciation of the complexities and subtleties around mental health. One's a want, one's a need, and we're focused on the needs here. So yes or no in the chat facility, are you able to pinpoint your colleagues' health and well-being needs? We should have like a 30-second music timer, Brian, for next time.
We used to. I don't know what happened to that.
Lots of no's. All no's, actually. Okay. You always jump to solution mode. Yeah, so everybody know. And that's really interesting. And you're not alone in that. And now you can see you're not alone in that, right? If everybody's saying it, that's the same as most organizations. So that just highlights the challenge, and it also hopefully helps you self-identify maybe the reason why what you're implementing may not be getting the value and impact that you want, because it might not be addressing the need, it's probably addressing the want. And when you address the want over the need, it's surface level, and it never really does anything by way of moving behavior or culture. So let's imagine you've now implemented the right questions in your health and well-being survey. You've taken a few months to really do some persona profiling and focus groups, so you've got the voice of your community and you've created your benchmark. Now we're going to get into the design. So the things that we can start putting in place that make best use of our data. So if we jump on one slide, this is when we reintroduce that Venn diagram. So we bring back that model of stress, and you imagine that you're in a room with all the people on the well-being team, and you've got the model of stress, emotional, physical, and chemical, with all of the stressors from your discovery phase. So bad back, loneliness, isolation, energy dipping due to nutrition, etc. Then you get the same Venn diagram and you start mapping out all of the things that you currently have on offer. So what are you currently giving your employees by way of health and well-being? And you start to draw lines from one to the other. Is this challenge directly solving this need? Sorry, is this solution directly solving this challenge? If it is, great. If it's not, could you simply change the way it's articulated to drive greater engagement, or do you need to change the solution? And I'll give you an example. Let's say Brian is suffering from musculoskeletal pain and a bad back. Let's say I'm suffering from isolation and anxiety, and let's say that Richard is suffering with connecting with colleagues. Okay, now take yoga as an example, something that many businesses think great solution for lots of our employees, so we'll do one a week in the office. Now, if that's articulated as a yoga class to everybody, come and join, you know, Jane for a weekly yoga class at 9:30 a.m. on a Wednesday morning. You might get a few people. Now, if it was articulated to Brian, come and join Jane on a Wednesday morning at 9:30 a.m. to rehabilitate and strengthen your spine. Bang, it's hit his pain point. If it's articulated to me as come and join Jane for a weekly yoga class where you'll learn how to de-stress and unwind, bang, it's hit my pain point. And if it's articulated to Richard as a way to connect with colleagues and drive relationships, again, it's hit his pain point. So you might have the solutions, you might have the activities, but they're not necessarily being articulated correctly because you haven't identified the need. Now, if it doesn't identify the need, then maybe you need to start thinking about other solutions that can help that challenge. Okay, so that's where that model of stress can be really, really important. But I'm going to whiz through how we go about designing engagement journeys alongside organizations that can maximize the amount of value and impact that it has, because often this is a stage that missed. We recognize that engagement is the most important thing, because if people aren't engaging, we're not helping. So these are the stages that we tend to go through. When it comes to the onboarding, so if we move on one slide, that beautifully designed WorkLifeWell electric car, I should say. When it comes to the onboarding, there are a few things that we need to do before we've even activated the program. So Richard, you were talking about role modeling from the start, you know, and I think Joss, you said it as well. Have we got our C-suite, our senior leaders and stakeholders fully on board before we've started? Do they know their involvement in their role, as opposed to having to work backwards once we've already activated? Have we told everybody about all of the energy and efforts that's going to be going on over the year to come, as opposed to just flagging it a week before and inviting people to standalone events? We need to let them know that we asked the questions. This is what you told us. So this is what we're doing to help solve it, as opposed to just these random emails that people get about a workshop on cost of living. It's important, but not necessarily solving the need. So then we move on to activating the program. And that's always about the consistency of messaging. Have you thought about your comms and how you're linking one activity to the next and the thread between the two? So yes, great to have a workshop on mental health or on emotional intelligence, but how are we using that content and implementing it cleverly in our processes and policies? Otherwise, it feels a bit disconnected from the business and the organization. And then in order to grow our health and well-being engagement and strategy, that's about making sure that we're continually reviewing the data, not just engagement data, but what are people telling us? What value did they take from it? What sense and what feeling did that specific activity give them? And how could we change it going forwards? Health and well-being is fluid, right? So our strategy needs to be as well. We need to keep refining and changing. And when we add those three things together, that's when we can really thrive and take our health and well-being strategies to the next level. So your well-being strategy and your engagement strategy need to work synonymously. They need to work together, not in, you know, almost in conflict of one another. Are there any questions about that specifically before we kind of move on to the delivery and kind of the last 5-6 minutes before we take some questions? Any questions? Any thoughts? No problem if not. Go on, Sarah.
Hi. I was just going to say, I think that's a really smart way to make those connections. I think in my organisation, I think that's exactly the challenge. We have loads and loads of really good stuff that we do, but it doesn't land very well with our employees because it's not cohesive, and also we're not really connecting to that individual's particular issue or need. So I think that's just a really smart way of doing that.
Good. No, I'm pleased that you found some value in that. So have you taken time to try and identify the wants and the needs and the landscape, or has it been a little bit more kind of solution mode driven?
A little bit. Well, I think this year is the year that I think to date we have been very solution focused. What we're trying to do this year, we're doing a survey at the moment through our engagement survey on well-being. So we're trying to get some better data, and also we have a bigger project which is about how we package up much more effectively the moments that, you know, in the moments that matter, all of the things that we do, not just on the well-being piece. So I think it's a very kind of relevant and valid exercise piece of work that we'll be doing this year.
Right. I think that recognition of needing to take a step back from the always on type of approach to now we really want to hear from our people is definitely the right move to take, especially in the climate that we're in at the moment. Sometimes just asking the question of your people, how can we better support you? What are your main challenges? Does a huge amount for their health and well-being in the first place, because they feel listened to and part of the strategy.
Yeah,
So-
exactly. And all of the stuff often is there. It's just that we're not it's just about how we help and market and help
Exactly.
them see the support and the tools that are available.
Yeah, Brian will tell you all about that. It almost needs to have a mini marketing plan in itself for the wellbeing strategy to drive engagement.
I think
Go on, Brian.
That's it, Ollie. Exactly. I think where this framework is different is it deliberately distinguishes between the activity, the program, and the engagement. Because ultimately, we all know, well, I say this, I suspect, but we all know that spinach is better for us than chocolate. But we don't choose spinach every day. I mean, that's my admission here. Clearly, I choose chocolate every day. So why is that? Well, I need to form a new habit. To form a new habit, I need to form a new behavior. So if we all know what we should or could be doing in many cases to be healthier, but ultimately to form a new habit, what we need to do is tackle the behavior. And I think that's why we've broken those two things out. Is the program alone may not necessarily, in its entirety, tackle the behavior, and that's why we need an engagement or internal comms plan or marketing plan, whatever you want to call it, to start to chip away at the behavior by understanding the specific needs of individuals.
Wasn't quite sure where you were going with that one on the spinach and the chocolate one, but it's,
well, I tried to bring it back.
You did very well. You did very well. Last couple of slides, just wanted to end with a bit of a case study in the delivery, in that we don't really think too much about how we deliver a great health and wellbeing strategy until we've got a proper design, until we've got a proper discovery phase done and we've designed the right experience. So a few of you have mentioned it already, especially when you were talking about your cost of living crisis campaign, that the delivery is all about blending your offering, making sure that every person in your community is going to hear, feel and see what the effort and energy is. So using Gerald Edelman as an example, and a really great case study, who are they have a traditional accountancy culture, but they're incredibly progressive from a business perspective. If we move back one slide, Brian, but they're really, really progressive from a business perspective. They learned that their employees didn't necessarily feel comfortable turning to one another for support. The partners didn't necessarily feel comfortable leading by example because they're from a slightly different demographic and they didn't know how to role model that behavior. So instead of taking one at a time, we built out a few separate strategies. So we did a discovery section for the colleagues in the organization around what are your specific challenges, what are your needs? And in the background, we're doing some partner training on how to better understand mental health, emotional intelligence, resilience, communication, and the role that they play in culture. Like I said, the environment always outweighs good intention. So what is their role in dictating the environment? So whilst we're then delivering workshops and different levels of support for the community of Gerald Edelman around all of those topics, we're also helping the role models in the background. Then, partway through the relationship, a year or so in, you start hearing, this is really great information. I'm getting loads of insight into how to better manage my stress and mental health. But where are the partners? Where are the senior leaders? And as if by magic, at that point, because we've been doing that in the background, that whole program culminates right at the right moment in a panel discussion, inviting the entire organization during working hours, right? Everybody is invited to log off and come to this because we see it as important as tax return, or maybe not quite as important, but you get the point. And the partners are sat around a table with everybody watching. And the only point of conversation is mental health, emotional intelligence, and communication. And that really sets the scene for breaking down those long kind of standing barriers and hurdles that people have in setting up emotionally acceptable environments. And when we think about culture and well-being, often businesses think of this long, shiny list of benefits and this long, great list of activities, when in reality, all you need to be thinking about from a cultural perspective is, do we have the 3 S's? So a 3-legged stool, think of it. And this is a good one to note down if you've got a pen and paper. The first S stands for safety. Do my colleagues feel like they are safe enough in their environment to turn to their manager, their partner, or a colleague at times of need? If they do, then the second S is, does the person who's hearing that feel like they have the right skills to support that person. So we've got safety and support. And then that third one is when we have those two things combined, it creates a sense of stability. So is the business transparent in this is what we've heard, this is what we asked, so this is what we're delivering? And when you can create safe, stable and supportive environments with no health and well-being activities at all, the health and well-being of your people will be far better than unsafe, unstable environments with access to 1 million well-being activities. And there's a massive difference between the two. And there's a really important distinction there. So think about all of your communities across your organization and how you can engage them at the same time for different purposes to bring them to that central place. We knew that the overarching goal of Gerald Edelman was to break down the barriers of communication. So instead of making the business wait for a year whilst we train the partners and vice versa, do them at the same time and end in this kind of spotlight event that really sparks culture and ignites and catalyzes change. Does anybody have any questions or thoughts or reflections on that before we bring all of this together at the end? No? Okay. Oh, yes. Vanita, go for it.
Sorry, struggling to unmute there. Hello, just a quick one really. So one of the things we're exploring, we're still at very early stages with it, is mental health first aiders. I don't know if anyone does something similar in any other organisation, but we've kind of noticed there are a few people in the business who outside of work, you know, have interest in this, and we're trying to almost upskill now, almost like a pool of employees who want to be part of this, so that if we are in that situation what you've just explained, we know that people are talking to the right people that actually have the experience and skills to support when needed. But like I said, we're early stages with it, but it is something that we are exploring.
Right. And mental health first aid is a fantastic resource. You have to remember that that should be a part of the wider strategy. So we've got a really great relationship with the CEO, Simon Blake, and he describes it really well as we're here to listen and direct, we're not here to solve. So if you think of mental health first aiders as spreading a network across your business of people who can empathize and understand, as long as they are up to date and you also have the right support systems in place to be able to direct somebody at times of need, then that's the right combination. And what I mean by that is if you have 100 mental health first aiders across the business, but no real access to any level of support beyond that, then you've solved the issue of feeling safe enough talking to a colleague, but not necessarily solving the actual problem. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Brian,
There is, there is one health first aid, and of course it's a very positive thing, and it says a lot, and it helps to normalise conversations around mental ill health. One of the common challenges that we hear from those organisations who have implemented it is, well, we've trained a bunch of first aiders, but no one's going to them. So they're not getting a chance really to have these conversations and to have this impact. So maybe before you step into, take a step in this journey, maybe consider how you might seek to negate that challenge if that was something you were to experience. Because once you've introduced it, it's like with anything, you want to be able to maintain that momentum.
I don't want to overload you with information around it, but there's one other little nugget that I would give as well. When you're thinking about who's best placed as a mental health first aider, don't go for the obvious choices. It's like picking a well-being team, and the people that you pick are those that cycle into the office every day and eat really healthily. Pick the people that are going to have the greatest impact. So maybe the person that has suffered with mental health and isn't overly comfortable talking about it, but you know of this person and you've got a relationship with them. Often picking somebody that people, I wouldn't expect them to be a mental health first aider. I didn't know that they'd gone through this. And how you position them is the best way to drive kind of any level of insight and engagement into, like Brian said, making sure people use it. We have a few other hands up. Kay. I don't know, Kay Langley?
Yeah,
Kay?
we've had mental health first aiders in place now for a number of years, and on the whole it works quite well. But I agree with you around the careful selection, because often it's heavily trust led. So colleagues will go to the mental health first aiders that they believe can be trusted with very private personal information, and that other colleagues have sort of recommended. So we've got a pool of them, but we tend to find that it's one or two of that trained pool that are very frequently being spoken to. And I totally agree with your point around solution. Some of our mental health first aiders are brilliant in terms of empathy, but they want to solutionize, so they stop signposting and they start being amateur therapists. And so actually their time investment is substantial alongside their day job, and they're providing moral support effectively, but it becomes a bit of a crutch to the colleague confiding in them, which creates all sorts of knock-on impacts. So it's small, the benefit outweighs the negative, but there's some of the challenges that we've had.
It's a really great point. If you ever think about what are the three things that stop somebody giving somebody else support, the first one is a lack of awareness and understanding. The second one is a fear of accountability. Am I then accountable for that person? And the third one is often time. I don't have the time because I'm dealing with my own challenges. Mental health first aid focuses on the first one, that it upskills people to be able to better understand and appreciate, not necessarily better support. So your role is to not only build out that team of mental health first aiders, but to equally think about what support do I have thereafter. So Vanita, to your question, that's a really important part of your strategy. Okay, very conscious of time.
Yeah, I think we're going to skip Ollie. We're going to skip this section. This is just bringing those elements together and talking about some of the metrics and measurements. I think in the interest of time, the conversation's already started. The questions are coming in. So what I suggest is we just outline, if we want to continue this conversation after today, some of the things that we could support, and then continue this Q&A so that we can add as much value today as possible.
Yeah, absolutely. So we kind of boil it down in three areas, depending on where you are in your journey. If you've heard anything today that resonates and you wanted to continue the conversation, whether that's better understanding the wellbeing landscape through a wellbeing diagnostic, or learning how to implement that framework and strategy relevant and tailored to your business would be the kind of that second one, or learning from specialists and upskilling, whether it's senior leaders and partners through to employees around lots of different topics in the wellbeing workshop space. But you know, if you're interested in continuing the conversation in any of those areas, feel free to drop me an email. I think Richard will send an email around after as well, so you can have our details there. But like Brian said, we're far more conscious about answering some specific questions and tailoring it to you now whilst we're here. So yeah, Brian, if we kind of unshare and open up to all of you, what any particular questions or thoughts or insight?
Jen, sorry to interrupt. I'm just going to point you towards the chat. On Vanita, you've probably seen this, but Claire Howes just put some good feedback on how they use mental health first aiders as well. Claire, thanks as ever. So that was really useful. And then Martin Smith had a question which you might want to start off with. Other than leaders role modeling, how do organisations create a safe environment for colleagues to talk about this?
For colleagues to talk about mental health specifically? Yeah, it's a really great question. Can I ask what if anything, what you're doing at the moment and why it might not be working?
I wouldn't say it's not working. The reason I ask is because your three S's about safety and skills and stability really resonates with me. I can see why that is so important. But your first step is that safety. What is it that makes someone feel safe enough to approach a colleague or HR, whoever it is, to talk about this stuff and start the conversation? And obviously the example of the accountancy firm with the partners and stuff was brilliant. Have you heard of any other examples of things about how you can sort of create that trust on this topic?
Do you know what? I hope that this answer isn't too annoying, but I can see why it might be in advance. It is just genuinely about consistency, persistency, and having the right people role modeling the right behaviors, right? If I am somebody who is suffering from mental health, from a particular challenge, and I don't feel comfortable or safe in my environment, if I then become the anomaly, because the environment, like I said before, is now a culture of communicating and regular events and senior leaders talking about these conversations, I will eventually join in with that culture. So there isn't necessarily a particular activity. I mean, you can do things like a day in the life, right? And if you imagine the concept, a day in the life is you ask people who are brave enough from different areas of the business to talk about their experience, whether it's of themselves, of a loved one, of a friend, and whether it's through a video or a voice note or a newsletter, and a dedicated comms consistently around that area to normalize the conversation. There are lots of different tactics. The only tactic that I would tell you to use is a consistent one. Pick one and drive it and stick with it. We've seen so many organizations get to month 4 or 5 of those types of things. People still aren't really talking about it. Let's try something else. We're talking about mental health where, you know, if we think historically, you're about 18 times more likely to experience anxiety than you are to break your leg, but you're 52 times more likely to talk about your broken leg than your anxiety. So to shift that balance, it's going to take more than 3 to 6 months of trying. It's going to take 18 plus months of consistent behavior, but the same behaviors, right? Does that answer your question?
No, that's really, really helpful. Yeah, no, that is good.
Good.
And it reminded me, I work in education, and some of my teacher friends and sort of well-being things that have filtered through to me that have really stuck with me are when, you know, as an organisation, people have said, right, well, you are, like, be really explicit in terms of expectations. So you are not expected to communicate with parents beyond, you know, the end of the school day, or you are not expected to write reams and reams of reports for your kids. It's just a sentence because that is enough. And I think that's had quite a big impact on most people too. So thank you. That's really helpful.
Great example.
Yeah, really good example. Any
Thanks,
other questions?
I think we might have time for just one more of that. Apologies, we're about to run out of time.
No?
Oh, one, Joyce. Thanks, Joyce. Welcome.
Hi. Just very quickly, really, really helpful session. Thank you. The most successful I've seen this work is I worked at Test and Trace before I joined HMRC, and the leadership team there held weekly calls and very regular calls where they shared their well-being, their stories, their background, and really opened up and kind of very open about their vulnerabilities. And the following the director for Test and Trace had was amazing. He talked about how he'd sadly lost his brother at a young age and how that influenced him and what he did, and how well-being is so important because that gave him a way out of the grief that hit his family. And that openness caused people in the chat to come on and to talk, and it was just the way it was accepted because
It's a fast track to normalizing the conversation and making employees know that this isn't something that we just invest in the background. This is something that we also experience. And it, you know, if we think about what empathy means, walking in other people's shoes, yeah, that's the best way to empathize, is to learn about people. Thank you, Joyce. It's a really good example.
Yeah, really powerful story to end on. Thank you, Joyce. I really appreciate that. Ollie and Brian, excellent. Thank you for showing the care and effort you obviously bring to wellbeing strategies as well. We'll send the recording out. We'll send the slides out. We'll include your emails. Should I also say two more things? Thank you so much for all your input. Really appreciate it. And I think, Ollie, this has been a great day for self-branded hoodies. I think we've felt
there we go. Yes, exactly.
Thanks for coming, everyone.
Yeah.
And everything else.
Right,
Thank you.
See you later.
Thanks
Thank
for
you very
having
much.
us. Really appreciate
Bye.
it. Bye, everyone.
Bye. Thank you, Richard. That was really good.
Over the second. So recording. There we go.